There is a fortress buried beneath centuries of silence, not destroyed in war, not scorched by the light of a Jedi blade, but undone from within. Its halls, once adorned with Sith sigils, now lie cold and hollow, the stone charred and fractured by fire. It is a tomb, not of bodies, but of knowledge. No Jedi ever breached its gates, and no Sith dared to ever return, because what occurred within was not a collapse, but it was a purge, an execution of legacy, a self-inflicted wound that would bleed through centuries of Sith history. And at the heart of it stood a man calling himself Darth Gravid. Darth Gravid was a Sith Lord, a scholar, a heretic, and he nearly destroyed the very order that he swore to perfect. He called his doctrine the unifying path, a vision so radical, so blasphemous, that it drove him to destroy countless holocrons, artifacts, and rituals, not in rage, not in madness alone, but rather in faith. Gravid believed that the dark side was incomplete, that the Sith in their obsession with control and domination had lost everything vital to them, and he sought to fill that void with the very thing that they had sworn to oppose, with the light. What he attempted was not corruption, it was synthesis, an impossible reconciliation of opposites, a new vision of power through balance, and in doing that, he brought the Sith to the edge of extinction. Darth Gravid lived around 533 BBY, nearly 3 centuries after Darth Bane first established the Rule of Two. By this point in the history of the Sith, the Baneite lineage had solidified into something cold and methodical, a hidden war of succession, where knowledge was hoarded, power was passed down like a blade, and survival meant everything. But Darth Gravid was different. Where others sought strength through cruelty, he saw understanding. Where others sharpened their hatred, he studied. He was not the product of wrath, he was the product of doubt. He immersed himself in Jedi texts, not as an enemy, but rather as a student. He questioned the foundations of the dark side, and slowly, obsessively, he began to craft a brand new philosophy. He named it the Unifying Path. It was not simply a blending of Jedi and Sith teachings. This was something far more dangerous, the belief that true power came from embracing both light and dark, compassion and passion, restraint and fury, serenity and ambition. Gravid envisioned an order that could transcend the dichotomy of the Force, but the Force does not reward contradiction, it punishes. To walk between the light and the dark is to stand on the blade's edge, but cut from both sides. As Gravid delved deeper into his vision, his connection to the Force began to fracture. The dark side, sensing his hesitation, recoiled from him. The light, sensing his corruption, refused him. In reaching for balance, he became imbalanced. His meditations turned to obsession. His thoughts spiraled into fragmentation. His identity snapped. And worst of all, he began to lose his faith in the very foundation of the Sith tradition. In secret, he constructed a bastion. There he hoarded the greatest repository of Sith knowledge seen since the fall of the Old Republic. Rituals from the Golden Age, doctrines of alchemy, forbidden techniques scrawled in the margins of holocrons passed down from the Dark Lords of old. And at the center of it all, he guarded one power above all others: essence transfer. It was the lost ritual. Essence transfer was the closest thing the Sith had come to immortality, a technique that allowed a dark side spirit to leap from one body to another, defying death through sheer will. It was first discovered in the ancient era by Darth Endedu, later mastered by Vitiate, and obsessively pursued by Darth Bane in his final days. But Gravid may have perfected it. Some believe he uncovered fragments of Endedu's original teachings, pieces that Bane never found, and that Palpatine would spend a lifetime trying to recover. If the stories are true, then Gravid held in his hands the last complete pathway to Sith immortality, and then he destroyed it. The ritual of essence transfer was not lost to time, it was lost to flame. In Gravid's efforts to purify the Sith, he consigned their greatest secret to oblivion. Sidious centuries later would clone body after body in a desperate attempt to reconstruct what had already been burned by the hands of a man who believed that he was saving the Sith. As his obsession deepened, Gravid sealed himself within his stronghold. He raised force barriers around his bastion, isolating himself from the galaxy and from the Sith Order itself. Within those walls he began the purge. One by one, holocrons were shattered, scrolls reduced to cinders, relics consigned to fire. The knowledge of worlds, the legacy of empires, gone. And then came another, Darth Gean, his apprentice, his shadow. She had not been taught these deep rituals. Gravid in his spiral withheld them, believing she too may be corrupted by the path that he had already begun to transcend. But Gean was no acolyte. She was trained in pain, raised in the crucible of the Rule of Two, and what she found behind those barriers was not enlightenment, it was betrayal. A Sith Lord who had turned his blade inward, a master who had destroyed their inheritance, a heretic burning the legacy of Bane to ashes, all in a pursuit of doctrine that had never belonged in the darkness. And so she did what a true Sith apprentice must. She challenged him. She breached the barriers. Darth Gean, the apprentice raised in the shadows of the Rule of Two, carved her way through the outer defenses of the bastion with fury and purpose. The fortress had once been a sanctum of power. Now it reeked of smoke, scorched parchment, and ritual fire. The air inside was thick with ash. The walls wept heat from weeks of quiet destruction. She moved through now a graveyard of power and of the inheritance that she deserved, her history. The holocrons were gone, shattered, burned, the scrolls unspooled into flame, relics of unspeakable potency smashed against the stone. What had once been the most complete collection of Sith knowledge since the fall of the ancient empire had now all been reduced to a funeral pyre. At the center of it all stood her master. Darth Gravid turned slowly to face her, his robes tattered, his face pale, hollow. He was not armed, not in the traditional sense. His lightsaber hung at his waist, untouched. His eyes did not burn with hatred or fear. They burned with certainty. "I knew you would come," he said, "and I hoped. I prayed that you would see what I have seen." Darth Gean did not speak. She did not need to. Her silence was a blade, her stance her verdict. "The Sith are broken," Gravid whispered. "We build legacies of pain only to see them crumble in fire and betrayal. The Jedi, they fear emotion. We worship it. Both are incomplete. But together we could become something more." He gestured to the flames around him, to the blackened remains of the Sith power centuries old. "I destroyed this to make space for the future." Gean stepped forward. "You destroyed everything." And that is when the duel began. Gravid ignited his lightsaber first, not out of aggression but necessity. His style was like anything Gean had ever faced before. He moved like a man unbound from fear, casting aside the rigid ferocity of the Sith lightsaber combat for something slower, more fluid. An echo of Form 6, almost meditative. But behind that grace was power, terrifying, overwhelming power. Even fractured in spirit, even isolated from the full strength of the Force, Darth Gravid fought with the fury of someone who had trained alone in silence, sharpening himself not for survival, but for revelation. Gean, by contrast, fought with the raw, unfiltered brutality of the Baneite lineage. There was no elegance, there was no restraint. Her blow struck hard, fast, and with lethal intention. She wasn't trying to teach her master a lesson, she was trying to kill him. Sparks lit the chamber like flashes of memory, each one illuminating the ruins of a history lost forever. They fought atop the ashes of Endedu's rituals, between the cinders of Sith alchemy, near the hollow plinth where the last essence transfer scroll had turned to smoke. But still Gravid endured. "You still do not see it," he hissed. "We could be more than Sith. We could be whole." But even as he spoke, his movements grew erratic. His footwork staggered. The fractures in his ideology were manifesting in his combat. Hesitation clashing with instinct. Serenity interrupting rage. He struck with a Jedi's precision one moment, and a Sith's savagery the next. He was slowly becoming nothing. The turning point came not with a strike, but with a severing. Gravid landed a clean blow, arcing his lightsaber across Gean's left side in a vicious vertical slash. The blade bit deep, searing through her shoulder, arm, face, and chest. Flesh burned, blood hissed. Her scream echoed off the stone. She fell to her knees, unarmed, mutilated, broken. But she did not yield. There was no plea, no retreat, no surrender. "You destroyed the Sith," she rasped. "Now I will destroy you." And with that she rose. No lightsaber, no tactic, purpose. Gean threw herself forward, disarming Gravid with a burst of raw, violent power. Her pain had become a weapon, her fury unrestrained. She struck him with no elegance, but with desperation, with grief, and with betrayal. And in the end, Darth Gean killed him, not with the lightsaber, but with her hands. Gravid collapsed to the floor, eyes wide, not in fear, but in recognition. "You understand now," was the last thing he ever said. His apprentice did not answer. Gean stood over his body, her own ruined, her skin scorched, one arm hanging in shreds, but still she stood. In this moment, Darth Gean was not a victim, she was not a survivor, she was Sith. That was not a victory born of strength, it was born of sacrifice. Gravid, even with his broken connection, had nearly destroyed her. Had he embraced the dark side fully, he may have annihilated her without effort. Had he surrendered to the light, he may have become one of the wisest Jedi Masters of his age. But he chose neither, and the Force had abandoned him. His failure proved a truth older than the rule of two. The Sith cannot be balanced. They exist in opposition to the natural order. The dark side thrives in distortion, in extremes. The Jedi flow with that current though. The Sith attempt to twist it. To reach for both is to drown. The legacy left behind from this duel cannot be overstated. I would even go as far as to call it the greatest duel of the rule of two. With Gravid's death came the loss of untold power. The technique of essence transfer, known, studied, perhaps perfected, vanished in flame. What Bane had chased, what Sidious would later dedicate his entire life to reclaiming, was destroyed in a single generation. The rituals of mass sacrifice, the secrets of the Sith spirit binding, the ancient alchemy of the Golden Age, the voices of the Dark Lords who spoke through talismans and holocrons, all of them gone. And Darth Gean, the woman who preserved the rule of two, would carry her scars forever. Some say she replaced her lost limbs and organs with Sith technology, augmenting herself until pain became power. Others say she lived out only to train a successor and then died of her injuries. Darth Plagueis believed the latter, but one thing is certain. Without Darth Gean, the Sith would have died at that fortress. Without her pain, there would be no Darth Sidious, no Vader, no Empire. She was the hidden pillar of the Sith's future, a mutilated sentinel standing in the ashes of the past. The fortress fell silent. Its walls, once brimming with the echoes of power, stood hollow. The holocrons were gone. The scrolls were smoke. The ancient tongues that once whispered through the halls no longer spoke. Darth Gravid was dead. Darth Gean, scarred, broken, but victorious, emerged from the ruins not as a survivor, not as a conqueror, but as a vessel for pain, for survival, and for the rule of two. But what she preserved came at the cost of the Sith would never fully recover, because Gravid didn't just die in that fortress, he took nearly everything with him. The Sith have always been defined by their relationship with power, not only in its pursuit, but in how they preserve it, through their rituals, their relics, sorcery, and alchemy. Knowledge to the Sith is as sacred as dominance. Without it, there is no ascension, no legacy, no continuity. And yet Gravid deliberately, methodically erased centuries of that legacy. Among the rituals destroyed in this purge were some of the darkest, most potent, and most elusive powers that the Sith ever uncovered. Let's break down exactly what was lost and the consequences of it. Obviously, essence transfer, the apex of immortality for the Sith. First discovered by Darth Endedu, essence transfer allowed the Sith to project their consciousness into a new host, bypassing death entirely through sheer strength of will. It was more than survival, it was actual continuity, a means by which a Sith could live through generations, expanding their empires across lifetimes. Bane pursued the technique obsessively, attempting to transfer his spirit into his apprentice Zana. Vitiate, known later as Valkorion, many believe perfected it. He didn't just use it, he thrived on it. Leaping from body to body across centuries, Vitiate ruled over multiple empires in multiple identities. Through essence transfer, he essentially became a god. Sidious generations later would attempt to reclaim this lost art. He would pour vast resources into cloning, into body preservation, into Sith artifacts and hidden vaults, searching for a ritual that Gravid had already possessed. It was said that Gravid had accessed teachings from Endedu's own lineage, hints, fragments, perhaps even the full ritual itself. Not theory, not legend, practice, and that he destroyed it. Look at it like this. What Palpatine would spend a lifetime failing to reconstruct, Darth Gravid erased in an instant. This act alone made him one of the greatest failures in Sith history. But he didn't just stop there. The rituals of mass sacrifice came next. The ancient Sith were practitioners of large-scale sacrificial rituals, ceremonies that drained the life force of entire populations to fuel apocalyptic powers. Lords like Naga Sadow, Exar Kun, and Vitiate wielded these rituals without hesitation. These were not battlefield techniques, they were planetary incantations, designed to ravage worlds, summon entities, and empower a single Sith beyond comprehension. By the time of Bane, these practices had already faded from memory, but Gravid in his studies had reconstructed what many believed to be portions of it, recovered fragments from the holocrons of Sadow and Ragnos, rituals that drew a collective suffering, turning death into fuel. Those too were thrown to the fire. He also destroyed spirit anchoring and Sith object binding. One of the hallmarks of the ancient Sith Lords was their ability to anchor their spirits to objects, holocrons, tombs, and talismans. This form of pseudo-immortality allowed their consciousness to endure even after death. Karnus Mur, Zozan, and Endedu each demonstrated variations of this technique, binding their essence to artifacts that would haunt generations to come. But in the era of the Rule of Two, these powers are conspicuously absent. We see no true spirit-bound Sith, no essence-possessed objects, no haunted temples speaking with the voices of the dead. It's not because the rituals were myth, it's because Gravid destroyed it. Then he also destroyed alchemy and transmutation. The ancient Sith could warp biology, they could twist flesh, shaping beasts, creating monstrous Sith spawn through using dark side science and force incantation. The likes of Sadow, Kun, and Ragnos wielded these arts with terrifying ease. And while it's true traces of alchemy survived in the later eras, most notably in Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious's experiments, true Sith alchemy was never again seen at the scale practiced in the Old Empire. Gravid had restored pieces of it, and then he incinerated it. We learned that before he destroyed it all, he was essentially a great collector of this knowledge, a completionist in many ways. And this is where I think the story gets really haunting. Because Darth Sidious, often viewed as the culmination of the Rule of Two, was in many ways a restorationist. He was a scavenger, a Sith whose power was immense, and all of it was spent rebuilding what had already been lost. Sidious's obsession with temples, his relentless pursuit of ancient holocrons, his creation of clones, vessels, and Sith libraries, all of it stems from a single truth. Palpatine did not inherit a complete legacy. He inherited the ruins left behind by Gravid. Everything that Sidious did, every experiment, every corrupted artifact, every dark side excavation was an attempt to reclaim what should have been passed down naturally. Instead, he built an empire on fragments, on echoes, and even with all of his power, he never found what Gravid had destroyed. This is why so many fans, and even characters in the lore itself, believe that the ancient Sith were more powerful than their successors. It's not just mythologizing, it's reality. The ancient Sith wielded knowledge that allowed them to reshape life, defy death, to dominate through presence alone. Their power wasn't in lightsaber techniques or clever manipulation, it was in ritual mastery, in domination over the Force. The Rule of Two, by contrast, became more refined, but less esoteric, more focused, but less cosmic. They were clever, dangerous, and efficient, but they no longer played with the same metaphysical fire, because that fire had been put out by their own. There is only one figure in Sith history who mirrors Gravid's descent. That's Darth Traya. Like Gravid, Traya saw the Force as a prison. She questioned the binary between Jedi and Sith, believing that both were flawed reflections of a greater truth. She had also descended into heresy, abandoning dogma in pursuit of philosophical freedoms. But where Traya turned her hatred towards the Force itself, Gravid sought reconciliation with it. He didn't hate the Jedi, he didn't despise the Sith. He desired to unify them. He genuinely believed that serenity and passion could coexist, that empathy could enhance power, that balance was not the enemy, but the final form of mastery. And in trying to hold both visions in his hands, he shattered. Traya saw futility in the Force, Gravid saw potential, but both stood in defiance of what the Force really is, which is uncompromising. Gravid's mind broke because he tried to resolve contradiction with belief. He walked a path no one had successfully walked before, not because it couldn't be conceived, but because it could never survive. This is the final tragedy. Darth Gravid, for all of his heresy, was brilliant. Even in spiritual collapse, he wielded power that nearly killed his apprentice. Had he embraced the dark side without hesitation, he may have become one of the greatest Sith Lords of the Rule of Two. Had he embraced the light, he may have stood among the wisest Jedi of his era. But instead he chose to walk between, and the Force abandoned him for it. The unifying path is an inevitable one, because for every Sith who seeks to dominate, there will come one who seeks to understand, who questions the pain, who seeks another path. But the dark side does not evolve. The dark side devours, and in trying to save the Sith, Gravid nearly destroyed them. Darth Gravid's name is rarely spoken, his memory is buried, his legacy scrubbed from history, reduced to whispers, but his impact endures, because long after his bones have turned to dust, the Sith have still paid the price for his visions. And if you ever wonder why Sidious feared death so deeply, why he hoarded knowledge like a starving man, why he never truly trusted his own creations, it's because deep down, he was always chasing the ghost of Darth Gravid. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on this lesser-known Sith of the Rule of Two? Was he a visionary or a madman? Leave your thoughts down below, guys. And as always, I hope you enjoyed today's Holocron upload, and may the Force be with you.